So, we're now on period 2 of U.S. history, which is from 1607 to 1754, and that is the start of English settlement in America with Jamestown to the beginning of the 7 Years' War. So called because it lasted 9 years. So, 1607, we have the founding of Jamestown as the first English colony, permanent colony, of course, after Roanoke, which disappeared after 2 years. For some strange reason, no one knows why, all of a sudden people they just disappeared, and there was some strange writing on a tree. Like, we don't know what happened to them. It's like it's a really famous ghost story. But Jamestown was the first permanent English settlement in America, and so it was really bad there in Jamestown because the first settlers, get this, were not looking for religious freedom. They wanted gold because they thought that America was literally just full of gold, and when they landed on the beach, they would literally just be tripping over gold bars. And they were very wrong, and actually they brought a lot of goldsmiths, not a lot of women. Lots of goldsmiths, lots of rich, middle-class people who were not the main inheritors of their parents' wealth, and so they wanted to search for wealth in the New World. And all these people that came on the trip to Jamestown would rather die and starve to death than farm and get their hands dirty. And so John Smith was fed up with all of this and was like, no, you better start working right now, and if you don't, you will die and it will be very painful. You will not get any food, right? And so they started farming, and then John Rolfe is considered the savior of Jamestown because he introduced tobacco, and tobacco was the cash crop of the Chesapeake Society. The Chesapeake Societies are like Virginia, like around Virginia, and so those are the cash crops, like the cash crop tobacco societies. Of course, the Southern societies also had cash crops, but they did rice and sugar. But the Chesapeake societies did the tobacco, and tobacco destroyed the land, and so they needed to like travel around. And so Virginia is very important because it's the first place. It starts this plantation society, right, where you have like people with more land are at the top, and they had these indentured servants working for the cash crop society, and they'd rather have indentured servants because of the headright system, because the headright system basically said, for each person you bring with you, you get 50 acres of land. And that's headright, you know, per head, right? You get 50 acres of land per head that you bring with you on your trip. And so a lot of these people were indentured servants, and so after 7 to 10 years, they became free, got money, got land, got tools, and they were able to start farming. Of course, they had to farm to the west, and that caused problems with the natives, as they encroached more and more on their land. And so this leads to Bacon's rebellion. Nathaniel Bacon was an aristocrat, but he wasn't within Berkeley's inner circle. Berkeley was the governor of Jamestown, and he wasn't within his inner circle, and so therefore he got fed up with this and caused a rebellion and an insurrection within the indentured servants. And this is very important because it caused the English colonies to realize, oh, maybe we should stop having indentured servitude because they know that they're English, and they're smart enough to realize that they also deserve the same rights as us. So let's just use African slaves instead. And so this becomes, this is the reason why lots of African slaves get shipped over to the West Indies, to Southern societies, and to Chesapeake societies. And let's talk more about this Middle Passage Columbian Exchange. So the Middle Passage is the passage of West African slaves to the New World, and that's part of the Columbian Exchange. So the Columbian Exchange is like this new thing, revolutionary, right? It's so called because it's the exchanges between the Old World and the New World that happened after Columbus found the Americas, and so the Europeans introduced diseases, new old world foodstuffs to the New World, and New World foodstuffs, animals and stuff went to the Old World, and Old World animals also came to the New World. But specifically diseases. Diseases eradicated so many Native Americans. They went from 75 million to like 3 million throughout the entire Americas in like 10 years, which is crazy how many people died. It's just insane. It's the greatest killing and death of people in the entire history of the world. But let's move on to the New England colonies. So the New England colonies were the colonies that wanted religious freedom, and so they were the Puritans. The first colony, however, was Plymouth, the Plymouth Bay, and that was the Pilgrims. There's a difference between the Pilgrims and the Puritans. The Pilgrims were separatists, and the Puritans were non-separatists. The Puritans just wanted to purify the church, and they thought that they were like extremists. Although the Church of England was a little bit more different after the last archbishop had been removed from office, they still thought that it was too Catholic, and so they moved out and tried to form their own society of equality, though of course it was not equality. It was not equal at all. It was just this society that faked being equal. Well, the church people had all the rights and ownership of the entire place. They had all of the power in the colony. And so this can be seen in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which is a New England colony, which was founded by John Winthrop. And John Winthrop wrote the Model of Christian Charity, which I'm sure you read. We will be a city upon a hill. City with 2 T's, of course, because he does not know how to spell. Just kidding. It's older English, and spelling was different back then. So he thought that the Puritan society would be looked upon by everyone, and that it would be a model for every Christian in the entire world. And they founded their society. Everyone got an equal plot of land, but of course he got the most power in the entire society, and anyone who went against the equal Puritan society, like spoke up against Puritan ways, like Anne Hutchinson, Roger Williams, they were cast out. So Roger Williams was cast out to Rhode Island, where he founded the Rhode Island colony, and Anne Hutchinson was cast out to Connecticut, which she didn't found at all. She was just killed by Indians there, and John Winthrop thought, oh, this must be a sign from God. Not even kidding. He quote unquote said, this must be a sign from God to kill that disastrous woman, or something like that. Like, he actually said that. I'm not kidding about that. But Anne Hutchinson was much more of a threat, because she was a woman, and she was like, hey, direct revelation from God can happen to anyone. You're not actually teaching the proper teachings of the Calvinists, which were people who believed in revelations and direct revelations from God. But the Puritans believed that only people with like church blood, like sainthood blood, could become saints, visible saints, right? Visible sainthood allowed you to become members of the church, like head members of the church. And so basically, with the halfway covenant, basically they just maintain power forever. So Massachusetts becomes this Puritan society, and then we get into William Penn's new Pennsylvania colony, which is a middle colony. So let's get more into the middle colony. So the New England colonies were extremely religious. The middle colonies were between the New England and the Chesapeake societies, and they were like the middleman. They were extremely diverse, culturally, ethnically, religiously. And it was just equality for everyone, right? Quakers was William Penn's holy experiment. Well, the Quakers, basically everyone was equal, including women. Women were equal in this society, which is one of the first societies of English societies that had equal representation for everyone. Catholics were welcome, everyone was welcome, and it was a great time. So Maryland was also one of these middle colonies. Well, it wasn't a middle colony, really. It was more of a, it was actually a New England colony, Maryland, I believe. Maryland was a religious colony, of course, but it was for Catholics. It was owned by the Calverts, who wanted religious freedom for the, because I said religious freedom, pretty sure it's a New England colony, but it's but it's like above Virginia and between the middle colonies in Virginia. I don't know what it is. It's probably a middle colony. It might be a Chesapeake colony, but it has the same sort of setup as a New England colony. Rhode Island is right next to there, and that's the New England. It's very weird, the setup of all these colonies, but just know that Maryland is a Catholic proprietary colony, meaning that someone was given a lot of land by the king to create this province, this colony for Catholics, and so the Calverts created this Catholic colony. And so the southern colonies, like the West Indies, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, they created this rice, sugar societies that required a lot of African slave labor. They didn't use a lot of indentured servants. That was the Chesapeake Society, and that ended with Bacon's Rebellion. And so they used African slaves from the Middle Passage, which was the course of travel from West Africa to the New World. And so a lot of Africans died on this Middle Passage and were thrown out in the sea, and that changed shark migrations because they were like, hey, we get free food, because of all the dead Africans and the terrible conditions or the Middle Passage ships. And so we get to the end of the period with the start of the 7 Years' War, which lasted 9 years, 1754 to 1763. But we also see from 1720 to 1750 two new ideas that pop up between in this time period. And these are very important. So we have the Enlightenment and the First Great Awakening. And so the Enlightenment was like a change in ideas. People started becoming more scientific with their thought processes. Benjamin Franklin, who shows up way later in U.S. history too, was an extreme Enlightenment thinker. You know, the kite story probably isn't true, but he did invent invent firemen, and he did create the fireplace and bifocals. Probably didn't discover electricity. That was probably already discovered way before he did that kite thing. And even if he did do the kite thing, kites are insulative, and so they probably didn't have lightning go through them, so I don't know. Anyways, yeah, he was an extreme Enlightenment thinker, and you have to know that deism popped up in this time period. Deism is the belief that God created the universe and then left it alone to fend for itself, because he's a very neutral creator. And this actually upset a lot of like evangelicals, like Protestant evangelists, who are like extreme, like, oh, God is great, God is good, we need to appease God. And this actually shows up in the First Great Awakening, which is the counter, like an attack against the Enlightenment ideas and the Enlightenment thinking, which is the scientific thinking. It's like a counter to that, like, you have angered God. Like, he's like the main guy, I forgot his name, but it was like, you have angered God so much that he will smite you down and you will go to hell, right? And he scared like a lot of people. Like, he was such a good speaker that like people would faint during his speeches. And basically, this caused a lot of unity between the colonies. A lot of new religions were formed: Baptists, Methodists, all these new branches of Christianity were created, and this actually is very important because it signifies the step away from the Church of England in the colonies that were still connected to Anglican society. And basically this allowed for the British to start feeling that the Americas were like being naughty children, or like very like disobedient children, right? Like, he was like, oh, you're being disobedient now, you stepping away from the Church of England? All right then, how about you enjoy a Revolutionary War? And so these two are the very important movements of this time period. And one last thing, let's talk about the Native Americans of this time. And so so a lot of the Native Americans that they encountered were like the Powhatan, the Mississippian, all these modern Indians. So the Pueblo Revolt happened in the 1620s, and that is important because it shows the end of the Spanish encomienda system, because they won. The Pueblo Revolt was a success. Of course, the Spanish came back 10 years later and reconquered them, but then the Spanish were a little bit more lenient about the religious tolerance of the Native American religions, and they ended the encomienda system because they realized that this was a bad thing. Not really that they realized it was a bad thing. They just thought, we don't want another rebellion or a revolt, so let's just be safe about it and not do this thing again. But we also, so the Mississippian were like fishing, lots of agriculture. Powhatan was like not Sacagawea, Pocahontas. The story with Pocahontas, John Brown, or was it John Roll? I forgot. But like They got married. Pocahontas dies like 2 years later when she's like 18. And so it was not John Smith. John Smith was 60 years old when she was 12, okay? That is not a thing, okay? Sorry to ruin that for you, but that was never a thing. And so yeah, that's basically period 2, and we're going to start period 3 with the 7 Years' War and end it with the election of Thomas Jefferson in 1800.